Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started now. I am Jennifer Stowell, and I handle the technical aspects for our webinar events. Welcome to Managing an Appraisal Practice. If you have any questions or concerns during this webinar, please use the chat, or you can email me at admin@asanorcal.org. Now I'm going to turn it over to our Vice President, Andrea Roth. Andrea, please take it away.
Thank you, Jennifer. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We have a really exciting program for you, and we're so happy you could join us. I started thinking about coordinating this webinar last year, since I know that appraisers from all disciplines encounter challenges in managing their businesses. I wanted to create a forum in which we hear from appraisers of different sized firms as to how they manage their operations and describe their challenges, while an expert in business processes provides some solutions.
She just
Our panel, I'm sorry. Our panelists are Petra Lohr, who is a business valuation appraiser with Anderson, Dana Teixeira, who is a machinery and technical services appraiser with Teixeira Maritime Surveyors, and I am Andrea Roth, who will be our final panelist. I'm a personal property appraiser in fine arts, and we will all introduce ourselves in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. We want this webinar to be interactive with all participants, so we invite you to write questions in the chat, and we'll address them during the webinar as they relate to our themes or at the end. We'll also open it up so people can speak in live time. The webinar is scheduled for 2 hours, so we'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible, so everyone will benefit from this discussion forum. Now I'd like to introduce Belle Walker of Bellevue Consulting, who will moderate the panel. Belle is founder and lead consultant of Bellevue Consulting. She is the original organizational efficiency engineer, taking clients from friction to function by aligning structures and processes with strategy. Belle spent her career building and optimizing teams at such organizations as Google and Here Technologies. Belle has a mechanical engineering bachelor's degree from Harvard University and a systems engineering master's degree from the University of Southern California. She leverages the engineering problem-solving process to design and builds the most complex systems possible, those comprised of individuals. Now I'd like to turn it over to Belle Walker, who will introduce the webinar and our format. Welcome, Belle.
Thank you, Andrea. I am super excited to be here. I have been learning a little bit about appraisal and appraisal practices and preparing for this webinar. And as I have noticed over time, you all are organizations, whether it's one person, 5 people, or 5,500. There's commonalities around the business needs, the structures, the processes that will allow you to operate most effectively, the tools that you can bring to your aid. And I'm really excited to be emceeing and facilitating this conversation, because you and Dana and Petra are such experts both in what you do and how you do it. So I'm very excited to be facilitating your wisdom today. So to set the stage, we're going to be following roughly this high-level agenda. We're going to take a moment to let each of the panelists introduce themselves, and then we're going to go through these 5 sort of high-level categories. We're going to start with business development, move along into client intake, then the people management, the operational challenges and resources, and finally the technology and tools. The plan is to have the panelists speak to some specific questions within each of these categories, and then fold in questions from the chat as possible. We're only planning to fold in 1 or 2 questions from the chat in each section as we go through, and then we'll circle back at the end for as many questions as we can take. So we're really looking forward to having a whole bunch of participation and for hearing from our panelists. And so Petra, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off, telling us a little bit about yourself and your practice, that would be fantastic.
Sure, I'm happy to do that, Belle. Thank you. So I'm Petra Lohr with Anderson. I'm a managing director here. My focus is business valuation and intangible assets. So I'm here representing the larger firm. I work for kind of a traditional accounting firm model. Anderson is a global tax and valuation firm. And just to give you guys a sense of size and scale, so our firm is about 2,000 people in the US, but there's 80 of us in the valuation group. My team in San Francisco is about 40 people in valuation. I'm one of 12 managing directors across the country who are kind of working within the hierarchy that some of you who work for larger firms are familiar with. So we start off as an associate right out of school, senior associate, manager, senior manager, director, and then managing director. So we have this hierarchy that kind of flows to each of our engagements. So when I'm working on projects, I'm working typically with a team of, there's 3 of us. There's me, let's say a manager and an associate. So I have a team with me on every single project that I work on. Maybe in contrast to some of the larger accounting firms, we are not a national valuation team. So what that means is our San Francisco office works with our San Francisco resources. Our Los Angeles group works with our Los Angeles resources. And part of that is we don't have an audit practice at Anderson. So Anderson is just tax and valuation. And because of that, we don't need to kind of grab people from, whichever office tends to have availability. I know that some of the Big Four and other firms use that sort of model. So we tend to be kind of local. Yeah, I think that gives a good overview.
Yeah, that's a fabulous overview. And just in case people were wondering, I'm not going to keep this slide up the whole time, but I wanted to keep it up while we're going through the introduction. So anyone who's coming late has a sense of what is in store. And then we'll switch to just these lovely faces when we really get into the discussion. So thank you, Petra, representing our large practice end of the spectrum. Dana, would you be willing to introduce yourself next?
Absolutely. Hi, my name's Dana Teixeira. My background is in the maritime industry. I graduated from California Maritime Academy in 1980 and then went to sea for several years working on ships, fishing boats, survey boats, and ended up working on tugboats. After that, I went ashore and worked in management for a towing and dredging company. In 1991, I apprenticed with a marine surveying company in San Francisco. And then 1997, I started my own marine surveying company. In 1995, I joined a marine surveying association. In 2013, I joined the American Society of Appraisers. Marine surveying is kind of a funny offshoot industry. It's basically anything about boats, barges, cranes, ships, and cargo and shoreside structures. Some marine surveyors don't do any value appraisals, but most do. Some do more. And probably a lot of people can attest to this. Most marine surveyor appraisals are not particularly well done. So I spent about half my time handling damage claims for marine insurance companies, doing damage appraisals or investigations, about 40% of my time doing value appraisals on commercial marine vessels, mostly tugs, ferries, dredges, barges, and shoreside structures. I've got my designation in appraisal review and management as well as MTS, and have done about 4 appraisal reviews in the past few years. The rest of my time, I work as an expert witness. My company's set up as a subchapter S corporation, but I work pretty much as a sole proprietor, and I'm here representing the smaller end of the scale for appraisal practices.
Awesome. Thank you, Dana. I'm really appreciating the diversity we're getting, not just in terms of the size of the businesses, but also the areas of focus. So hopefully that will make things extra interesting for our attendees. And Andrea, would you mind rounding us out with these introductions?
Yes, thank you. I'm Andrea Roth. I have a small fine art appraisal firm. I've been in business for 17 years. I do appraisals for insurance coverage, estate and gift tax, charitable donation, as well as sale and purchase consultation. I have 2 employees who assist me in the day-to-day operations, on-site inspections, research, and data entry. Because many of our appraisals are for complex estates, I also collaborate regularly with subject specialists in such fields as Asian art, Oriental carpets, antiques and decorative art, gems and jewelry, as well as MTS appraisers. While the appraisals are the main portion of my business, I also have a collection management portion of the business where I do inventories of large collections for corporations, universities, and a fair amount of corporate art consulting as well, which requires procuring artwork, inventory management, and installation. And that's in general the gist of my business.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you all for giving us some context around who we're going to be talking to, what you all do. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing the screen so we can really focus in on the conversation. And let's dive into how it is that you all are successful in the what of your businesses. So as you saw in the flow, we're going to start right up front with that business development piece. There's not a lot of appraising to do if nobody is willing to ask you to do it. So I wanted to start by asking, where do you get your business? And if anyone would like to speak first, speak up. Otherwise, I will designate someone to go ahead.
So I'll start. I get a lot of my business from everything is referrals, of course. So my biggest referral partners are insurance brokers, trust and estate attorneys, CPAs, financial advisors, other appraisers, of course, and past clients. I'm also part of Provisors Networking Group, which I know several of you are very familiar with, and that has been a really wonderful source of referrals for me as well. I spend a lot of time doing business development, and I do presentations at risk management groups and estate planning organizations. And I track referrals using a spreadsheet. So I've started to be really careful to try to track where referrals are coming so that I know where the best use of my time is. Yeah, anything else that I missed?
I think that's a great start. And so Prime, you represent in this case the heavily referral based approach to business development. And so I'm curious to see, Petra, is that similar to where your business comes from, or especially as part of a larger firm, does business development look different for you?
Yeah, so I guess I should give some context on the types of valuation work I do. So probably a third of my work is gift and estate tax driven. A third is what's called 409A, which is, working for private companies, helping them do valuations so they can issue equity to employees. And then the other piece of it, the other third, is financial reporting. So working with larger organizations, even public companies, to help them prepare GAAP financials. So because that runs the gamut from individuals to private companies to public companies, I get my referrals from a few different sources. I'm part of a big firm, but probably 20% of my referrals each year, or maybe 15%, come from other Andersen clients. So it's nice being part of a larger firm because I do get some level of business every year from, let's say, our tax clients, but it's not most of my work. And so it is a bit, you eat what you kill, right? Like every year I have to regenerate my business. But I track every year, kind of have a budget, and I kind of track how much is coming from existing, old clients versus new. And it tends to be that 2/3 of my business comes from old clients. And some of those clients in the context of gift and estate, my clients are the attorneys. So those attorneys might have, 20 different individual clients. So I might work on 20 different underlying, clients, but I consider the attorney my client. So if I think about that, 2/3 of my business comes from sources that I already do work for. And then that extra third, every year I have to find from somewhere. And so the way that I tend to get business is estate planning attorneys give me referrals, corporate attorneys, CPAs, and auditors. Auditors are a very good referral source for me. But I am also part of Provisors, the networking group, which that's been great for me. I've been doing that for 11 years now. I'm also on the membership committee for Financial Executives International, Silicon Valley. So that's a group of CFOs, VPs of finance, controllers. And then earlier in my career, I was part of ACG, and a lot of other networking groups. So I hustled a lot before making managing director, so that I would have kind of a funnel ready for me when I made partner.
Yeah, and so it's interesting to me to see that commonality, even though your business contexts are so different. It is very heavily referral based and relationship based. And Andrea, you didn't get into this specifically, but I'm guessing a large percent is repeat referrals, similarly from professionals, not necessarily the end client. And so Dana, are you in a similar category, or does your business development look a little different?
Probably looks a little bit different. When I started out on my own in 1997, wow, I spent a lot of time in developing my business. Mostly, I was going after marine insurance companies, and I spent quite a bit of time actually most of the companies are on the East Coast that I deal with, so I spent a lot of time doing. About every year I would make a jaunt to the East Coast and hit all the companies. Once I built up my business to a certain level, I did not really need to do that anymore. As I am approaching the tail end of my career, I'm trying to move my business into expert witness work, which does require a new business development strategy. So, yeah.
So in some ways you are aligned with our attendees as well. This is a learning opportunity as you're pivoting into a new business development phase.
Yeah, but at this point, most of the larger appraisal jobs I get, if they're not repeat customers, they're referrals from other customers or referrals from attorneys that I've worked with. And most of the expert witness work are referrals from, they actually have expert witness brokers that, I try to stay away from those guys because they take a large cut, but there are companies that just specialize in providing expert witness listings. So.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I imagine that is in some ways similar to the one thing I didn't hear was Google ads, for example. I don't hear any of you likely to be, if I need an appraiser and I go to Google because I don't know who to go to, your names are not going to come up. But it doesn't sound like that is a very profitable stream for this level of expertise. A lot of people who need really, especially high value items appraised, I think are going to go to the folks that they trust. And so it makes sense that you're targeting in and focusing in on the people, the trusted advisors, to borrow from the Provisors phrasing, but the trusted advisors who are going to be that first stop more likely than Google would be. And so that, I think, is an interesting thing about this industry that's not going to be true for every industry. And so talking a little bit about those sources and that kind of how you're approaching business development, now we get into a little bit of the part I'm most passionate about and the structures and approach. You mentioned tracking, and so I'm curious to hear a little more about the goals that you're tracking towards and how you are connecting those dots between the goals that you have and the information that you are collecting about your referral sources or your business development activities. And so, Petra, if we could start with you on this one.
Sure. So I guess I track things in a couple of different ways. So I have a budget each year. So at the beginning of every year, I kind of start and I say, okay, who were my clients last year? what's my expectation of revenue from those clients going into the following year. And then I do a kind of a quarterly look, like I expect these projects to come in this quarter, and then I say, okay, I can account for 2/3, or sometimes I say I can only account for half of my bogey each year. And then I have to figure out where the other half is coming from. So when I say a bogey, being part of a larger firm, the goal is set for me. And it tends to be set as, what was your last year's goal? Multiply it by some growth rate. Now, there's some acknowledgement of, for those of you in this industry, the last 2 years have been extraordinarily busy. So, our firm has some acknowledgement that, 2020 and 2021 were maybe extraordinary. So fortunately, I don't necessarily have to carry that forward for into perpetuity. But in general, it starts as last year plus a goal. And really the reason for that is being part of a larger firm. A large part of what I owe to the firm is stewardship. So I am expected to give part of my book of business to new partners coming up. So we've had 2011. We've had 2 other partners promoted since then. We're going to have 2 others starting next year. So every time a new partner is promoted, I give a piece of my revenue to them, and then I have to regenerate it. So we do track these revenue metrics that way. That's how I do the budgeting, but then I have a separate tracking sheet for referrals. And so especially from provisors, and for those of you not familiar with that group, there's a kind of a built-in expectation that you give a formal thank you to that person, which has been really great from creating structure in my business development, right? So I track what type of project did I get a referral, who was it? And then I make sure that I make the opportunity to go thank them at some point. And so that is a constant process for me. And for even my referrals outside of this networking group, I make sure that I go back and circle back with the person and say, did this referral work or not work? Regardless, thank you for that referral, and making sure to keep them top of mind going forward, to try to, pass them a referral if I can.
Awesome. Yeah. And I wanted to start with you because I think you are in that very different category with the goals coming from elsewhere, but in some ways that allows you to focus even more on how do you meet those goals, and how do you tweak your process to be able to achieve them. Because when, speaking also as an independent business owner, when I set my goals and then I'm tracking against them, I have both levers that I can be pulling to bring them into alignment, and that can be a mixed blessing. On which note, Dana, if you would like to chime in.
In the past, I had set my goals much higher, but I also had the mixture of my work. I had a lot more smaller jobs, smaller damage appraisal jobs. So it would not be unusual for me to have 200 plus jobs per year, which now that seems like a lot. So I have my expectations now. I shoot for about 75 jobs, but they have grown larger, maybe 25% are larger jobs, more complex jobs, fleet appraisals for ferries or tugboats or barges, that kind of stuff. So I don't really have a formal tracking mechanism. That's probably something I need to work on. So, yeah.
We're all awash in opportunities, so we can focus on areas that we excel in, areas we want to improve. And Andrea, as you also chime in on these goals, how you're tracking, how you're setting them, you had mentioned that you spend a lot of time in business development, and I think there's a real trap for small business owners to just spend more and more and more time in business development. And so I'd also love to hear if and how you pull back from any particular business development effort. Is it a constantly expanding set of business development, or how are you focusing?
Well, I wanted to go back for just 1 second to talk about you mentioned the Google ads, and I don't do a formally Google ads, but I will say that my website, I spent a lot of time a few years ago, time and money to create a substantive website. And I think that has really helped. I do get a lot of people who, don't know where to look. Maybe don't think that an insurance broker knows a good art appraiser, or don't necessarily know to reach out to their trusted estate attorney or their financial planner. And so they will do a Google search, and I show up, and I get a lot of, really decent, I wouldn't say they're my biggest clients, but I get some really good prospects that way. So I just wanted to mention that don't discount the website and the appeal of that to a lot of people. When I first started my business, I was happy with just 10 to 20% growth each year. Anything was great at that time. But I would say that since maybe, 2011, 2012, something like that, I saw significant growth every year. And since the pandemic, like Petra said, I mean, it just skyrocketed. I mean, to the point where it was hard to keep up. And I'm hoping it continues, but that was really wonderful. And I think some of it was the pandemic, but some of it was also, I really did hustle a lot for a lot of years and worked really hard to establish strong network of relationships with insurance brokers and trusted estate attorneys and past clients. And the way, unlike Petra's business, the way that with fine art appraisals, we might see somebody every 5 to 10 years. They don't come to us for, or when there's a death in the family, right? So they don't necessarily come to us maybe as often as maybe a business valuation situation might occur when there's a change. So I have repeat clients now because I've been around so long. And so, unfortunately, death and dying is good for my business. And so, I've kind of go through them that way. And then, of course, the insurance updates. What else? As I mentioned, I never had formal goals. It was hard for me really to do that. I just look for growth each year. That's kind of been the way that I've been successful and then thought about things. And I do have a very active, as I said, a spreadsheet that I keep because of provisors more than anything. I try to do what Petra does. You keep track of who sends business your way and try to reciprocate, and then of course thank them, and keep track of where things are coming from. So I've been really good about that. And I think provisors, as well as the traditional networking methods that I've employed over the years, are definitely working. But it's hard. It's hard to do it all. And this is where I am right now, is trying to figure out, how do I transition to more of a overall manager and less of a worker, because it's really difficult to do both very effectively and efficiently and not pull your hair out.
Very, very true. And so to round out the business development section, the tool that I will bring to the table, I will borrow from actually the tech industry, which may not seem like there's a lot of overlap, but when it comes to goal setting, I have found objectives and key results, that framework, to be incredibly powerful. And so if you're not familiar with OKRs, the objective is usually a high level, more qualitative objective that you are trying to pursue as a business or as a team, an individual. And so it might be something like, I want to grow my business year over year. But it wouldn't be, that's not the quantifiable piece. The key results are the quantifiable piece. Or actually, maybe a better objective would be, I want to be considered the leading expert in this particular realm of appraisals. That is my focus. So it's something fairly large, grandiose that you're striving for, and that tends to be the heart connection. It's what motivates you and what you are striving for. Then the key results are how you quantify those objectives. And so it might be a number of jobs that you take on. It might be a revenue target. It might be the number of referral sources that you get, number of referrals, percent of referrals that are for your target area, focus area, as opposed to other types of appraisals. Normally you would have a few objectives for your business, and you want to know which ones are your top priority, so that you go in knowing when you had those tough decisions, where do I spend my time? What are the top priorities? But having that breakdown of the high level objective and separating out those key results allows you to do checkpoints throughout the year, because I don't know if you've all had this experience, but it is totally possible to hit those metrics and not actually be achieving the key objective. And so when we don't take the time to think what that objective is, we can find ourselves with, on paper, successful businesses that aren't actually satisfying us or aren't doing what we need. Or conversely, we're not hitting those metrics, but we haven't broken them down into pieces. And so it can be harder to iterate and improve. So that's the tool. And I believe after the webinar, we'll be sending out some resources. So I'll make sure that some links to OKRs are in there, and highly recommend that as a way to tackle the goal setting, kind of regardless the size of your business. Although Petra, you might have more of an adventure fitting in those top down, either making those your objective or tying them in, if you can find something that motivates you, that those are the metrics for, might be more of a reframing than a goal setting for you. All right, that is, I didn't see any questions in the chat, so I'm going to move ahead to people management, although welcome to add questions in and we'll circle back later. And so just to set some context, let's remind everyone how many employees and subcontractors each of you has in your business. And Andrea, if you'd like to kick us off for this.
So I have 2 part-time employees, and the subcontractors really varies from, I might have a job where I deal with 4 or 5 different subcontractors if it's a complex estate with lots of different types of objects, or it might just be 1 or 2. So I'm tracking not only the day-to-day operations of the 2 employees, but also following up with these experts, making sure that they follow my, formats and things like that. And I've been working with many of these for a long time, so we've established that working protocol, so to speak. Did you want me to describe what the roles are of the employees, or that's for later?
Yeah, we can go ahead and do that now. Let's.
So the 2 employees, I try to not duplicate what each of them does. That's challenging sometimes. So I have one who kind of helps me with the day-to-day operations and more of the collection management focus, because there's a lot of little pieces to track and to follow up on in terms of dealing with shippers and installers and things like that. And then I have another person who does research and helps with the report writing and the appraisal work. What I would love is to have somebody also who does social media for me, because that is, as we all know, huge, and I'm terrible at it. Right? Even though I have 3 children who are, masters at it, I am terrible. I have no interest, total dislike it, and I need to change my attitude. So I would love to, learn pointers from anybody here on that. But having somebody, it makes no sense, of course, to pay somebody to be totally devoted to that, but to have some method of being more regular with my social media would be, I think, a boost to my business.
Awesome. All right, so we've got the 2 subcontractors, the stable of experts that you
2
can
employees, 2 employees,
Okay.
and then the subcontractor. Yeah.
Yes, 2 employees, stable of contractors, and some desired needs for the organization, which is great. Dana, how about you?
I have a quick question. Can we ask questions of each other?
Absolutely.
Okay. So Andrea, I'm just curious, because you seem to have your appraisal practice seems to be very, you have a PhD in art, correct?
Art history, yes.
Yeah. So does that mean that the people you hire have to have that level of education also?
No, not at all. No. What I look for are people who have some kind of art background, some sort of experience, either working for a gallery or an auction house or as a registrar or some, so that I don't have to teach them, the basics of, what is a lithograph or what is an engraving or, what's an oil on canvas, because I need to have them have some sort of knowledge of the art world and what different mediums are. But they don't need to have that kind of high level degree, no.
And do the people that you employ, can they theoretically eventually become appraisers on their own and go out on their own?
They can, yes.
Having a PhD?
Oh, for sure. Yes, yes, they
Okay.
certainly can. I mean, you
Understood.
certainly don't need a PhD. We have lots of fine art appraisers in the room today. We certainly don't need to have the PhD for that. Yeah, no, they don't. They oftentimes, I have one who is planning on going through the principles evaluation courses and becoming an accredited ASA member. And the other one, not so sure yet. Yeah.
Okay, so I am definitely a sole proprietor. I do all the work myself. I mean, once in a while I'll use a subcontractor, but not very often. So in the past, I have taken on employees to train them. But one of the problems with being a marine surveyor, and I think it probably applies to appraisers in general, is that it's a really portable profession. I mean, once you learn it, you can just go out on your own and take part of the business with you. You know, I mean, there's really nothing, unless you have some contractual agreement with who you're training, there's nothing to prevent that. So, yeah, so it is just myself. My wife is part owner of the business, so she helps me out with some of the bookkeeping. So, yeah.
All right, yeah, and it might seem at the surface that being the whole business in one person means that some of this people management topic will be less relevant to you, but I would argue in many ways it is harder when you wear all the hats, because we'll get into after Petra, next we'll be talking about how are duties allocated and or shared, and breaking down one person's time. That context shifting, I think, can be even more challenging than
I would agree with you completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the way other end of the spectrum, Petra, could you tell us a little bit about number profile of employees, team members, et cetera?
Yeah, I live in a really different world than Andrea and Dana because I work in San Francisco. My team is 40 people. We have 10 people who are tangible asset appraisers, so real estate, machinery, and equipment, and the other 30 of us do business valuation and intangibles. There are 5 of us partners or managing directors in San Francisco, and we're all business valuation folks. So that means even when I have a real estate client, I'm the partner for that engagement. So I'm kind of, working with my own teams that I have the real technical expertise, but I'm also overseeing, engagements where I know enough to be dangerous sometimes. So I've been doing it long enough that it works fine. But so like I said earlier, because we have a typical accounting firm structure, we have very distinct kind of roles for each team member, and I can talk more about that later, but really we have a group of staff, we'll call it, so associates and seniors who do most of the technical work. We have managers and senior managers and directors who do most of the kind of project oversight and client management. And then we have managing directors who are kind of like the technical review, clients, business development, et cetera. But being part of a larger firm, I have an executive assistant. She's not my dedicated executive assistant, so she works with a lot of folks, but she can help me with engagement letters and expense reports and billing and things like that. So I have some assistance there. Maybe on the negative side, right, working for a large firm, I also have lots of extra administrative duties, right, like performance reviews and risk management is much more complicated. We'll talk about that later. And so I'm interacting with our finance team and our legal team and our marketing team, et cetera. So, but for all intents and purposes, each managing director in valuation really kind of owns their own business. Yeah, and our 5 managing directors in San Francisco, we work really closely together. So it's a very apolitical organization. We all genuinely like each other, work together, try to make the group successful together. So the load of managing people is shared between the 5 of us.
And so that's a great lead into the next question. So let's just stick with you for a minute. How are the duties allocated and or shared? So people have specific roles, but can you give us a little more detail about what that means in the Anderson context?
Yeah, well, so there's kind of the project engagement context, and then there's the overall business management context, right? So the project engagement is the associates and seniors do most of the actual technical work and report writing and everything. And then, like I said, I think I walked through it, what the managers and directors do and what the partners do. But overall, for the business side of it, so the managing directors, we are responsible for all of our own business development and marketing and everything. We have a marketing team, but we don't use them that heavily. We're responsible for putting together all of our own engagement letters, in winning the work, onboarding the work, all of that, keeping the culture going. So I'm like the team mom. I'm a mom, but I'm also like the team mom. So we have a weekly staffing meeting that I run, and we work really hard, us, the 5 of us managing directors, on making sure that our people feel part of the team, valued. And that's all of it, right? Like that's the hardest part, is keeping the team, ticking. So there's that piece of it. We have training, right, that we have to do for our people. We have recruiting. I wear a lot of hats in our firm, and that's kind of just because I like doing a lot of things. And so I was one of the 3 partners who's been with the firm the longest. So I started in 2004 here, when there were just 3 of us. And so I manage resources nationally for our practice. I lead training for our practice. I lead recruiting locally, and then I get people involved, right? And that's part of in allocating my own time over the years, I've been figuring out which things do I need to do, which things am I the best to do, right? And so my goal in the next year or 2 is to transition off some of the responsibilities to other people who are very capable, right? And to give myself a little bit more time. So.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to believe that once you get a larger organization and you get some of that overhead and that structure, that all of these roles and responsibilities will become clear. And what you're talking about is a combination of, yes, there are some very clear divisions that come along with having a formal job ladder, with having titles that have a broader implication of the roles and responsibilities, but there is also quite a bit of this informal work, often invisible work that needs to be done. Even things like recruiting, which are pretty well tracked, nominally very formal, have these large invisible components that kind of feed off of the networking work that's being done, et cetera. And so I just as a heads up to the audience, if you're a small business looking to become a bigger business, those challenges don't magically go away just because you've developed a job ladder. But speaking of the smaller businesses, Andrea, if you want to tell us a little bit about how your business has allocated the roles and responsibilities.
Yes. Well, just listening to what Petra does on a daily basis just makes me tired. Wow. That's a lot. But I think, so as a small business, you're right. I do a little bit of absolutely everything, and everything is my responsibility. So not only, you have the day-to-day operations, but you have the level of responsibility that goes along with it. And some of that also comes with, do I hire somebody else? Because what if next year I don't make the same kind of revenue and I can't afford to keep them? So I've always had those kinds of, concerns that go along with growth. The way that I run it is I do, of course, all the business development, and everything that leaves the office, always, my eyes is always on it, so nothing goes out without my approval. So that's a lot, I focus on absolutely everything. I am an admitted control freak. And so, I probably could do a little better about, letting go. And I have the problem of, well, by the time I teach them to do it, I might as well just do it myself, right? Don't we all say that? So I'm a great candidate of that. But what I try to do is I implement a biweekly meeting with my employees where we meet on Mondays, and then either Wednesdays or Thursdays, kind of depends on what goes on. And so we plan the week, we see where everybody's at, what the responsibilities are, and who does what, and what the expectations are. And then we meet again by Wednesday or Thursday. How's the progress? What was accomplished? What do we still need to do? What are some of the problems? Do I need to get involved? Have you, and so we do that, and that's very helpful to kind of keep track. I don't know if we want to talk about some of the tools at this point.
I was going to go through challenges first and then
Yes,
round
okay,
out with,
yeah.
with some of the tools. Yeah.
Yeah, I still am working through the daily operational challenges where I feel that sometimes saying it's okay, it doesn't always have to be perfect. And that's a tough thing to learn. And so, oh, excuse me, goodness. Nothing's unmuted here. Yeah, I think that's gets us to where we should be.
Perfect. Yeah. And so then, Dana, let's use your section both to talk about how you think about roles and responsibilities as a solo practitioner, and then maybe also some of the challenges you face managing yourself. And then we can come back for the challenges and kind of grow the organization size. So the challenge, how do you think about your roles and responsibilities with just one hat? Or one head for all the hats, the challenges you face, and then we'll go through Andrea and Petra to talk about the challenges.
Yeah, so the challenges I have, when I had more jobs, 200 plus jobs a year, I mean, I basically during marine surveying pretty much had a busy season when people used boats, or if for not really for commercial, but the only downtime is usually December, January, February. So the other months a year, I pretty much worked 7 days a week. So just trying to, keep up with report writing. What I've done to try to alleviate that is to get more efficient. I try to, when I have a smaller job now, I do as much dictation in the field as I can using a smartphone, using dictating right into Google Apps or Google Docs. And then I immediately email that to myself, so it's saved in the cloud. And yeah, but it is a struggle being a sole practitioner because, I do my own billing, I reconcile the books, I, put my reports out, I contact, my clients. Yeah, so.
Yeah, so the challenges are, it sounds primarily it's the volume in the case where you have particularly limited resources and capacity. And then Andrea, any key challenges that you face when you think specifically about managing people?
The key challenges, being able to stay on top of everything to the degree that I want to be, and also the challenge to not to seem so critical of my employees. That's the thing, I mean, when I've had to, I know you have some great strategies for that, which I'm anxious to hear about. But that's, how to motivate in a constructive way that makes them feel they're still a part of the, ongoing process and the health of the company. And yet recognize that, things need to be done either a different way or, I mean, how do you kind of, I'm challenged in that. I have not had, business courses myself in how to do that very effectively. So I think I'm a nice person, and I, get along with pretty much everybody, and we have really great relationships with the employees, but I do feel that I could learn more from being a more effective manager, because I tend to just then step in and just do it myself. That's what and I don't think that makes them feel good, and it's not productive for me. So I would say that that's my biggest challenge, is that, we have a lot of different arms of the business between the appraisals and the collection management and the inventories, and those are kind of all going on at the same time, and keeping myself moderately involved, to the extent that makes sense, that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah, and that's you said you also have right, some capacity issues, or challenges, although that does then tie into some of that delegation. Yeah, and I have some thoughts and tools that I will share, but I'd love to hear from Petra before we do that. So yeah, I'd love to hear your key challenges in managing people.
It's funny. My husband is in the software industry, and he's a manager, a director in software, and he's always just so dumbfounded by our sort of firm structure, where I'm not really the boss of anybody, even though I have 30 plus people working for me. I'm not really their boss, right? So like I'm their supervisor, but ultimately, like, the head of our office, you know, and the CEO are the bosses of the firm. The way that with the formal structure, it works, right? Like, I manage an engagement, but I work with lots of different people. So every engagement I work on might have a different team. So I might tend to work more often with certain people, but every engagement has a different team's composition. And so that's really challenging, because in a way, I'm competing with my other 4 partners for resources, right? And then all of the managers I have on my engagements are competing with all the other managers for the staff's time. And so I have not been at a firm yet where we've gotten it perfect on how to allocate staffing needs. We've tried tracking sheets and, complicated Excel files, and we've tried lots of things. What we've kind of landed on as being the most effective for our team is we have a weekly staffing meeting. We do have a tracking sheet, but it's mostly just to keep each person kind of organized for themselves. And then everyone comes to the meeting, and we go around, different person leads the meeting each week and says, like, what is your availability this week? And we've defined what we mean by availability, like in terms of, I live in a chargeable hours environment, right? So I have to put my time in and track how much time is client work. And so when we say I'm moderate or I'm busy, there's a definition around that for people. And so in that way, we get a sense for who has time to help out. But it's really tricky, because people develop relationships working better with certain people than others, right? Management styles are all really different. I'm very different than my partners, right? And we know this about each other. And so some people might like working with me better than my partner, and vice versa. And so it's all, the people stuff is really the hardest. So I think what I feel very fortunate about is that, like I said, we're a very apolitical organization. So the 5 of us really feel like a cohesive leadership team. And we all acknowledge that we have different strengths. And so sometimes, like, I'm kind of the feel-good person in our team, the one like people confide in when they're having like family issues, because I'm the approachable one. And then one of my partners, he's the one who, like, everyone, if they want more money, or they're like frustrated about something, they go to him, they can complain to him. And so it's like we've kind of shared that. Yeah, but the people stuff is just like, it's an evolving thing, right?
Yeah, and for better or for worse, I will say I do not have any silver bullet tips. A lot of it really is around adaptability and flexibility, because it is a perpetual challenge, right? Whether you're managing yourself and trying to figure out how to best spend your time, it's going to evolve and change. This year may not look like last year, may not look like next year. And then once you get more people involved, of course, you have those dynamics and those different comfort zones. And so Petra, what you're describing is following a lot of the best practices I'm aware of, right, in terms of having those standards that you can reference, the ongoing conversations, and acknowledging what those roles are, even when they're not part of your formal job descriptions, right? Being able to have that conversation openly can make a big difference. So the tools I wanted to focus on therefore more around sort of the delegation piece of it, which can potentially also be helpful for a sole proprietor. Definitely people who are managing others, delegation is important. But even for sole proprietors, then you talked about the portability of the profession. But there are pieces like the financial, the accounting, the bookkeeping, the social media, the marketing. There are other elements of the business that can potentially be delegated, that can be easy to forget about until there are pressing needs. So the number one recommendation I have, Andrea, in terms of that, it would be faster for me to do it myself mentality, is to remember that statement should always end with "for now" or "for this project," right? Because as you train new employees or growing employees, that investment that you're really making an investment in their skills. You're not immediately handing something over. It's not, lift and shift. It is really this transfer. Anyone who's worked in larger organizations has had the conversation, I've got a new employee starting, or I can't hire right now because I don't have the time to deal with a new employee.
Right.
And that's just the reality of the situation. You increase the workload so that you can decrease the workload. And I have yet to find, even bringing, real experts into a new organization, they may know the subject matter inside out, backwards, forwards, but they still have to learn, how do we do things here? And so having as many standards as you can, being able to define these terms, right? Words mean different things to different people. So I loved, Petra, that you talked about what moderately busy means versus extremely busy, et cetera. Having some real guidelines there can go a very long way. And then having a process review built in where you actually take a step back and say, this is how we're tackling this. Is this working for us? And the other tool that I will share some slides for, just a slide for a moment here, is a RACI. So this responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed framework. So this I find is a really helpful tool for having those conversations, especially as you're starting to get into delegation. The distinction between whose head will roll if this goes wrong and who will be doing this task is incredibly important to have out and verbalized, because they are often different, especially in a hierarchical setting. This is the heart of delegation, the fact that someone else may do this thing and I am accountable for the end result. And it's why delegation is so scary, but it is also how we can give that shelter and training to our more junior employees. And so the responsible and the accountable are really the heart of this model. You can absolutely have one person who is both accountable and responsible. The key is only one person gets to be accountable for any given task or element. Once you have two, there are no heads that can roll. It really has to be just that one, whereas there can be dozens of people who are involved in actually executing. Knowing also who is consulted and informed can make a big difference in terms of getting people on board to support you if they know that they're only being asked to consult versus actually taking responsibility for a piece of the work. And being really clear within a formal structure, who's consulted and informed can avoid hurt feelings up front, because people who are informed but think they're being consulted might get very annoyed if their input isn't listened to. But if they were viewed as an informed party, it just may not have occurred to whoever was leading the effort that they expected to have a say one way or the other. So this is just a framework, a terminology for talking through some of these roles and responsibilities. And you can do this either in an organizational context or in a project context. So for this project, these are the different tasks or elements that need to be owned. Here are the owners. here are the executors, here's the folks we'll chat with, and here's the folks we'll update. And so again, this will be in the materials that we share. And for folks playing along at home, looking at that agenda, we did gloss over the client intake process because looking at the time. So we'll circle back to that after we come through operational challenges and tools. So before we move on to operational challenges, panelists, anything you'd like to add to round out this people section now that I've shared some tools before we move on?
Oh, I
Good.
think there's most of it.
All right. Oh, good. And we do have our first question in the chat. So I want to reward Ivan Evo, sorry, for taking the time to share a question. So curious about the volume of appraisals 2021 to 2020 or 2019. Do you have more work? It sounds like there's more work now, but what do you think are the key reasons for that increased volume?
I'll speak for me. So there were two factors that drove our business to grow a lot. One is a large portion of our work comes from gift and estate tax appraisals. And back in 2020, everyone was worried or excited or whatever side of it you're on that Biden was going to get elected and that he was going to have tax reform occur that was going to limit the amount that you could gift in your lifetime. And so estate planning attorneys kind of had a field day and, as CPAs telling their clients they need to be doing something. So that kind of happened all through 2020. It continued into 2021. And so those 2 years were just the busiest of my career. And the head of our practice, he's been doing this for 30 years. It was the busiest 2 years of his career as well. The other piece, though, is that there were so many IPOs and successful private companies during that time. So there was a lot of money flowing, and being in the Bay Area, all the tech companies here, there were no IPOs for 10 years, very few. It was like the funnel was closed, and then all of a sudden it opened, and there were all these companies trying to get out as quickly as they could. And there was a lot of venture capital money. So that drove a lot of 409A work. So a lot of our startup company work ahead of an IPO, you have to do valuations very frequently. So those are the two main things that drove the big increase.
Awesome. And is that consistent for Dana and Andrea?
Yeah, certainly the assumptions about the Biden tax plans definitely dictated the art collectors who were trying to create all sorts of clever LLCs and move artwork into those in order to avoid potential taxes. So I did see a lot of that. But in terms of the art world, there was so much activity. I think part of it was people being home during the pandemic and looking around their houses and, thinking about buying new artwork and remodeling and redecorating. They couldn't go on vacations. And so they tried to make their homes and vacation homes more beautiful and, change their scenery a little bit. There was that. The auction houses and the galleries, really adjusted to the online platform in a much faster way. It sort of fast tracked something that was about to happen maybe in a few years down the road, but it really, really, kind of put the battery in and got it moved a lot quicker. And so, whereas we used to have auction seasons, 2 or 3 times a year, now it's just happening all the time. And so there's just an enormous amount of activity and a lot of attention paid to it and a lot of, records broken. And so there was a lot of activity. I think part of it, the pandemic, and partly just interest in the art market. And so for us, it was really people wanting to clean house, and update their insurance policies and also update their estate plans. And so, at a time when people were staying at home, they were just focusing on things like that. That's, I think, what accounted for a lot of our business.
And for better or for worse, that sounds like that's really the market factors increasing. And I suspect that it's those business development efforts that we talked about at the beginning that have enabled you to actually keep a proportional share of that growing market. Because there's really two pieces there. the pie needs to get bigger and you need to maintain some piece of it. And sorry, Dana, I didn't give you a chance to chime in there as well.
That really didn't apply to my business, but what did apply from the pandemic were, I think, people bought a record amount of boats and subsequently smashed a record amount of boats. So that translates into damage appraisal work, and it's all good. So.
Fair enough. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us in your late evening. Appreciate you being here. And so, speaking of smashing things, operational challenges. I'm very curious to hear from panelists. What are some of the greatest operational challenges that you face in your business today? And Dana, if you'd like to kick us off with that.
I'm so sorry. I was looking at the chat board. Can you ask me again?
No problem. We're shifting focus to operational challenges.
Okay.
And so asking what your biggest operational challenge or challenges are.
So operational challenges, really the largest challenge for me is to get more efficient so that I don't have to spend 7 days a week trying to get everything done because I'm wearing all the hats. So, and I've done that through technology. I was using a Dragon Anywhere program to dictate in the field, but I found that using, as long as you have a data connection, you can use Google Docs and dictate right through Google, and it actually is more accurate. So that when I go out in the field now, I make sure I take pictures, I dictate, I write down key items. Marine surveying and even doing marine appraisals is a little different than the rest of the appraisal market because it's the main document that's produced by marine surveyors is called a condition and valuation survey. It's basically a very heavy on condition and inventory of a vessel, usually kind of light on the appraisal side, but you do have to spend a lot of time documenting the information that's on board a vessel. So that is, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So efficiency, and we'll circle back on that word in a minute. Andrea, we're going to go in increasing business size order for this one.
Well, I have a lot of the similar challenges that Dana does, I think, just being a small business owner. I think I would say probably my biggest daily operational challenge is, excuse me, staying on task and being disciplined enough to follow something from start to finish, because, you know, I'll get into my office in the morning and I, go through emails quickly and, finding a better way to kind of organize those, going, deleting what doesn't need to be dealt with, prioritizing what needs to be dealt with, and then beginning, my work. And then inevitably something comes up and I have to, my attention has to focus on that because there's some sort of crisis. And then I've got to go back to what I was doing before. And then I lost my place. And, so that I feel like I would love to create a better daily practice for myself that's a little bit more focused. I mean, I'm a very focused person, and I don't have, ADHD or anything like that. I have lots of other things, but not that one. But it's still, things come up and I feel that I need to respond to such and such a client because they expect it. I need to respond right away, or, the installer didn't make it, or they dropped a painting, or, whatever it is. And I need to be there, to immediately attack it. So that's something that I find challenging, is keeping myself on focus in a healthy way so that I don't get so frazzled like I let myself get. And in terms of daily challenge on site, I've really managed to, I bought myself a really lovely large iPad and I use that for my on-site work. And that has worked really well because then that goes directly into a Google Doc and that goes into my item description cataloging and my report and the photos. And so I've developed a really great system for that, which I'm happy with.
Awesome. And Petra, operations challenges.
I mean, I certainly suffer from the email overload and trying to manage that. I think that's a consistent theme for everyone. But I guess for me, over the last year or two, the biggest challenge has been actually billing. So one aspect of being part of a larger firm is that I have to enter my time daily, right, to the 0.1 hours or 0.25 hours, right? So daily time tracking is important. And then it's, we are, as a partner at a larger firm, some of my metrics include kind of my accounts receivable turnover and inventory, like my work in progress, all that I have to manage. And those are the metrics that the firm tracks and sees. And so I have to make sure that I'm billing time promptly, right? Sending out bills to clients. But on top of that, I have to do things called write-offs, right? So if I think the time, I'm not going to get it, I'm not going to be able to bill it out. I have to clean up my accounting system. So it's a lot of accounting system management and not necessarily just the send a bill to a client. So managing all of that is very challenging. And as an aside, our firm just went through an ERP implementation. So on top of it already being challenging, we have a whole new system to learn, and we've all been using the same system for 20 years. So old dogs don't like to learn new tricks. So that's been additionally challenging.
And that really highlights, I think, one of the key challenges I see in tackling efficiency or frustration points, because you're talking about this being a pain point. Fixing it without looking at a new system might not be possible, depending on what tools and constraints you're working with. But that doesn't make it appealing to learn something totally new. So it can be a bit of a catch-22. I don't like where I am. I don't like the idea of not being where I am. So one thing to sort of bear in mind as you're thinking about the efficiency of your practice is, where do you have the control to make the changes and are fighting your own reluctance rather than an actual lack of options or opportunities. But before we dive into that, this word efficiency I find really fascinating because it comes up a lot, and I'd love to hear from Andrea and then Dana. How do you define efficiency when you cite that as a key challenge? Would you mind digging in a little bit as to what that really means?
Getting a lot of work done in the least amount of time.
I was going to come up with the same definition.
Oh yeah.
Just if I can do the same workload and spend less time doing it, and the quality is the same, I think that's efficiency. So,
which gets into sort of my next question, which is how are you setting those standards, right? Because I think all of us would love to do everything very quickly, but we are also humans. We do have, there's a very real limit on time in the day. There's only so fast our neurons can fire. There's only so fast we can type or speak if we're dictating. And so there are these very sort of real constraints in what efficiency means. And so how are you setting efficiency targets? And I ask that because the other challenge I see is always wanting to be faster, better, more efficient, and hitting a point of diminishing returns. And then you start investing a lot of emotional energy into this improved efficiency when that may or may not really be practical. It might be that you need to scale the system that you have at its current level of efficiency rather than making your system more efficient. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about how you think about finding that balance.
I would think that the diminishing returns might result in a quality control issue, right? I mean, you can only reduce the work you put in so much without seeing, you know, an issue with quality, I think so.
And so have you found yourself reaching that point? And if I guess what I'm trying to dig into a little bit is citing efficiency as the number one challenge is fabulous and wonderful and admirable while there are efficiency gains available, but you run the risk of hitting a point where, to exactly what you said, increased efficiency might start to impact your quality. And if you are still striving for increased efficiency and unwilling to compromise on quality, you're just going to be stuck and annoyed all of the time. And so it's about sort of finding that balance, and this applies both when you're managing yourself and managing a team. If you have expectations for your team that you want them to be going, you know, faster, better, more efficient, without sort of a benchmark or a standard that allows you to be confident that those targets are achievable, you can be basically setting yourself and others unintentionally, well intentionally, up for failure.
So are you saying it's more of a mindset?
I'm saying that the mindset piece should not be ignored, right? And so this is where some of those structures and processes can be really helpful. You know, efficiency, especially in a small team, might look like, I would like my team members to be able to do these things as quickly and to the same standards as I do them. Or it may be looking more holistically across and saying, you know, this is something I'm not very efficient at, so I want to hand this responsibility over to somebody else because they do this one thing more efficiently than I do, and I will keep the things that I'm better at. But if you really are looking at your team and you're saying, well, I think that my team members use their time very well, produce high quality work, and I want my business to be more efficient, that's going to be really challenging because they're already using their time well, they're already doing high quality work. So what levers do you have to hit that efficiency? And so what I tend to see is often businesses do have great opportunity for increased efficiency. And we talked about some of it, using the technology, using the tools, organizational systems. But kind of before we get into the nuances there, as you're thinking about how to use these tools and these systems, I think it's really important first to make sure that you actually have a problem you're trying to solve, because otherwise you can find yourself making changes and just causing more frustration rather than actually getting improvements, if that makes sense.
So set a specific efficiency goal, right? Or take away the word efficiency, you know, just you're saying be very specific with the goal that you're trying to achieve. I think and it's hard to determine what that goal is.
Yeah, and Petra, you may have a little more. I know this is not as directly relevant to the billing and the time management that you're talking about, but I suspect this is less of a pain point for you because there are some clearly defined expectations for individuals in the larger business. And so when people are at, below, or above expectations, you can reference that in terms of their roles, their job description, rather than kind of the abstract metric of efficiency. Does that feel correct?
Yeah, and maybe this is helpful to think through. So because we have to track our time, right? Associates and seniors, especially in our team, are part of their compensation and bonus is heavily dependent on how chargeable they are, how much client work. So are they 80% chargeable or 60% chargeable? And these are things we look at. But we know that some people who spend 80% chargeable are not as efficient, right? They're not producing as good quality work as other people who are 80%, right? So there's good quality time and not good quality time. And so what we end up having to figure out is we use these metrics a lot because over the last 2 years, we've had a lot of people who've been over 100% chargeable time. And what that tells us is they're going to burn out. We need to hire more people, or the people who are 60% chargeable need to take up more slack, right? So it's when we see these things happening, it's our opportunity to say, okay, either they're spending too much time on things that are not important, right? They're inefficient in the way that they're going about things. And then we need to train them better. So then it's for us to help them get more efficient. Or we just have so much work to do that they're too busy. And in that case, we need to figure out how we are going to fix that problem, either by hiring people or using underutilized resources. So like that's kind of my mindset all the time. I mean, we get metrics every 2 weeks and I look at it and I say, these people have not taken vacation in 6 months or a year. I need to talk to them and make sure that they do. And I want a goal for myself is that next month, they won't be 100% chargeable anymore, right? Like I have to take responsibility for making sure that they are, having some quality of life. So anyway, it is something that I think about all the time.
Yeah, and it circles back, right, all the way up to those objectives and key results, right? Separating out the notion of really at a more sort of even emotional level, what are you trying to accomplish? And then putting the numbers to it. And I will keep hammering the prioritization as well, because you will hit trade-off points, to Dana's point about the volume of work versus the quality of work. At some point, you can't have both anymore, and you have to decide which is more important. Talking about the, making people feel like they are part of the team, that morale building piece is often crucial to getting an effective and an efficient business operation, but it's hard to quantify that unless it's in service of the broader goal. It has to be called out specifically. And Andrea, I think you put it well, right? I would say efficiency is most helpful when it's in service of something more specific.
Yeah.
To drive that efficiency, because otherwise you can forever search for improved efficiency. That being said, I am a big fan of just clarity in the roles. The RACIs are really helpful for that. In the processes, really defining what step happens after each, not because I think any industry always has the same thing happen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it allows for more straightforward delegation when you do have a typical engagement, and it helps with the delegating as well. If you know what the process is supposed to be, then it allows your team to operate independently until the deviations happen. And so it then sets clear expectations for when a leader needs to become involved or an expert needs to become involved, because you have a baseline for people to follow. And then when reality departs from the plan, then you can have the sort of expert strike team come in and help. And so I'm targeting for us to wrap up this sort of panel piece right around 11:30, so that we've got a full half hour for open conversation and questions out of our 2 hours. So the last section I'll ask about is just really expanding on these tools that you all are using. So I know Dana's mentioned just the native phone dictation and Dragon to Go. Petra, you talked about that there is an ERP system, and Andrea, you talked about a program that you're working with as well. Would you all mind expanding a little bit more on what are the tools and the technology that you're leveraging that you feel are most effective for your business? And
So, shall I start?
Yeah, let's go.
So for me, what I really found has changed my world is a project management tool called Asana, ASANA. And there's a free version, and there's also one that you can pay. But what it allows you to do is to create projects. So like an appraisal might be a project, a particular collection management might be a project, and it allows you to assign tasks to certain people. So I invite my employees or my, outside specialists to participate in this, and then I give them the task and with a due date, with notes, then they respond, and then we communicate that way, and we can put them into categories of to do, in progress, and completed. And that's what we use when we do our weekly meetings. We go through the Asana list and what are everybody's tasks and where they are with them. And is everything clear? Is it, what are roadblocks you're finding? How can we troubleshoot, and so on. So I find that a really great way. You can see everything at a glance. It shows a calendar view as well. So you can see when things are due. Certain projects have certain dates that we have to, follow. So I really like that a lot. In terms of email, I just really use my Mac mail, and I create folders for different categories, but I am not as disciplined with that. And so I find that still, I don't have a very good handle on that. Otherwise, I still use the typical Microsoft Office tools, from Word to Excel, and, the typical things that we all, I'm sure, use. But Asana has really been the project management tool that I would recommend highly.
Awesome. Yeah, I've used Asana. I'm also a fan. So.
Oh, good. Okay.
And there's several other tools that are kind of similar. So my recommendation is to play with the free version of a few when you're thinking about adopting one, and just seeing what fits best for you, because they each have little nuances. I have not seen any one that is ideal for every organization, but Asana is a great place to start, and then seeing, if that works for you. If it doesn't work for you, please don't give up on project management software. Check out some of the others, because you may find that whatever that pain point you had was a tool issue, not a concept issue. Thank you, Andrea.
What I was going to say, I use QuickBooks for the accounting software. I forgot to mention that. And I would love to know what people use for time tracking. That is another challenge that I have, keeping track, because again, I'm multitasking all the time. And what's an effective way of keeping track of your time?
And the chat is open, and we'll ask people to come off mute as we get into that last half hour. Dana, if you could share your tools, and we'll round out with.
Sure, I've got a huge list. Okay, so everybody is paperless now, right? So when I went from paper files to paperless files, I went out and bought a Fujitsu ScanSnap scanner, and it's really great. It scans fast, the paper feeder works. Doesn't take a lot, it only do about 20 at a time, but it works really well. It goes right into a PDF. I've got an app on my phone for scanning. It's called Genius Scan, and that's either free, or I think there's a pay version, which I have. And that's really nice because you can scan in the field on your smartphone and email it to yourself. So that works well. We haven't talked about backup storage. And backup. I use it on a Mac, and my primary backup is Time Machine, which works fantastic. But I also use a cloud-based backup called Carbonite. There's a lot of different cloud-based backups. It's just, to me, it's fairly inexpensive and it works well. I'm going to skip email. That's pretty straightforward. I use QuickBooks also. And I think I don't like the fact that they keep raising the price, but I think they've captured everybody. It's way too convenient. Let's see, software, Google or Microsoft 360. I use Google Docs too. Spreadsheets for damage appraisals, comparable adjustments. One of the things Matt Dienich put in that he says for dictating, he's been using a native voice memo app in an iPhone and then uploading it to an app called Transcribe. That sounds pretty interesting. I'd like to get more information from him on that. One of the problems I've got, I have to take a lot of pictures in the field, and I've got a couple Olympus cameras. One is a tough camera, point and shoot, which The advantage is it's waterproof. The disadvantage is it doesn't take very good pictures. It has this actually plugs into it. So if you drop it in the water, it floats, which is kind of cool. But neither of those cameras take as good of pictures as an iPhone.
True.
So I tend to use an iPhone except when I'm worried I'm going to drop it in the water. So let's see. Here's something probably most people wouldn't consider. I use these really kind of pricey notebooks. They're called Write in the Rain. And the advantage is they're waterproof and the paper is really thick. So they're like $4 a notebook, but sometimes you just have to say you're worth it. So
And imagine that's helpful for anyone who is working outdoors when they're on site, not just
the
Marine.
most traumatic thing that's ever happened to me is when I was doing a long survey and my canary yellow notepad fell into the oily bilge and you had to go down and dig through it. And yeah, anyway, take pictures of it because it was decomposing in front of your eyes. That's pretty much it. The other things are, when I do strictly marine surveying, there's other very specialized tools that don't really apply to appraisals in general. So there you go.
All right, thank you. And
Oh, I have one more thing. I have not upgraded my Mac iOS because I have an old version of Acrobat Pro, which I really find useful, but it won't work on 64-bit system. So if somebody has a recommendation for a program that will do the same thing, I'd love to hear it. So
awesome. Yeah, and hopefully we'll get some suggestions in the chat.
I don't have as exciting tools as you guys do. Being part of a big firm, I have, some of the tools that the firm kind of has us use. Believe it or not, we don't have a CRM yet. It will be coming in the next couple of years, but I am very excited about that prospect. So a lot of what I do is fairly manual, right? Like a lot of what I do is in Excel. We use Microsoft Outlook. I'm really big on folders for me, and I know everyone has their different personality, but I have tried keeping to-do lists and I'm terrible at them. I never maintain them. I get really frustrated. Every few years, I try to restart them. And so what's been most successful for me is my inbox as my to-do list. So when my inbox gets too big, I get very stressed out. So that's, a problem, but it also is the way that I make sure I'm on top of things. And I have a project tracking just in Excel that I do. From a actual interesting tools perspective, our firm uses Microsoft Teams very heavily for communicating. It's been a lifesaver because we didn't have it pre-pandemic and we jumped on it right when the pandemic started. And I think it has been the reason that our team has been able to maintain its culture as well as it has, because it's very easy for us to instant message each other on Teams. We do video or non-video calls really easily. We have Teams channels, like for our valuation team specifically, we have like a random channel. So people will put fun things in there, or an availability when someone has free time, they put it in there. We can put certain resources, like templates for things. When I do a lot of recruiting, and I just had a call this morning debriefing with the team who had interviewed the candidate, and I can attach things into my team's invite. So I have files for people to review, like their resume or whatever, and I can even whiteboard, which I love. So I'll go in there and I'll like virtually whiteboard out like what are people saying about this person candidate, and then you can save it. So I really love Microsoft Teams.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, whether it's Teams or the Google Suite has a similar interface. And those are kind of, most people I think are on one of those two email or communication systems. Having that place where information is stored and communicated outside of email is often really crucial to effective collaboration if you're working with multiple people, because email is great for anyone who's included on the email, but it's not discoverable when your team expands or changes or shifts over time. And so being able to either put things in Drive or put them in a team can really help with making sure that, you know, as you are onboarding or as you're trying to collaborate in the future, you don't have to send or reshare over and over again. It allows people to be a little more self-sufficient in finding those resources. So just additional plug for Teams or accessible file sharing in general. As Andrea put, Dropbox also, that's another way to keep those files and that information available to everyone. So before we open up for questions, I'm going to share one more tool, which I'll put in quotes because it's a little bit more of a communication tool, but it only works when you have all the other pieces that we've talked about here. So the shared goals and objectives that you're talking through, understanding what the roles and responsibilities are, and trying to keep people together and motivated. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about positive feedback, which is indeed a tool. And why it's so important is because when you look at the highest performing teams, whether this is a formal organization structure, project collaborators, etc., the ratio of positive to negative comments is incredibly important. And intuitively, I think we like to believe that if I say something constructive or maybe not so positive, dare I say negative, that as long as I balance it out with one or maybe even two, you probably all heard that Oreo feedback style of approach, the good thing, the bad thing, the good thing. Math is your friend here, but that 1 or 2 ratio is just not going to cut it. You actually need significantly more positive comments than negative to keep people feeling engaged and motivated. But it's not really helpful just to say good job, or just to toss out something vaguely positive but not meaningful. And so what I like to recommend is taking a structured approach to compliments. So when you're ready to provide that positive feedback, really sitting down and thinking about what is it that you are appreciative of? How was that thing that you appreciate done? Why was it done? And what does it tell you about who that person is? And to give an example, I wanted to take a moment to thank Andrea for getting me involved in this workshop, right? You coordinated all of us together, made this happen. You handled all of the logistics. You did regular follow-ups. You scheduled our tech check to make sure that this workshop is a success, not just for us as panelists, but you're bringing something to this community and to this organization that I think you saw as a gap and stepped up to fill, which tells me a lot about your diligence, your integrity, and the pride that you take in your work. So thank you. I really am honored to be a part of this, and I really appreciate the way that you pulled it together.
Well, thank you.
And thank you to the other panelists as well, to Petra and Dana, for bringing these varied perspectives to the table. This has really been an incredible conversation. And we have 20 minutes now to open the floor. And so while our attendees are thinking about what they want to share, Andrea, anything from an administrative perspective we should chime in with?
No, not from an administrative perspective, but I do see a great question from Kevin Blair. He's asking if anyone has a recommendation for software for report writing, looking for something you can input certain fields, data value, client address, et cetera, that will populate a template report. I think we all would love something like that. Does anybody have anything that has worked from in an appraisal format?
Well, you can put merge fields in any word processing program. I mean, you can do it in Word. I've got boilerplate. I mean, in the past, you actually used a program to I'd put all my input into a database and then I'd merge it into it. But yeah, Microsoft Word, Google Docs, you can do the same thing.
I know our real estate team uses something called Narrative One. I don't know if it's broader than for real estate appraisal. I don't know that much about it, but I know it starts as an Excel file that populates into a Word document that then is editable. But that does kind of help you get at least make sure all the numbers are flowing correctly, right? And some of the key information about the subject asset, the ownership, all the legal, the purpose of the valuation, all that kind of stuff flows into the report.
Yeah, I think I don't know about off the shelf, but there are also something like this might be a good Fiverr type of opportunity. So to Dana's point, right, Word, Excel, there's any number of kind of off the shelf programs that if you're really an expert, can create something like this. And so that's where, you know, looking to like a Fiverr or one of those sort of gig work platforms might be a good way to get something customized for what you want and need that looks great in a tool that you're familiar with, but not maybe that kind of design expert in.
Yes, Kevin also mentions Core BQE as a great online software that does time billing, accounting, project management. That sounds like really an interesting one that I should look into. Core BQE. Has anyone used that besides Kevin?
And I believe folks have the ability to unmute themselves.
Yeah, please.
If you want to chime in.
Yeah, please do chime in. I'd love to hear if anybody has different challenges than the ones that the three of us have expressed today, and how you've solved them, or if you need some guidance. And, you know, my hope was that this would be an open forum that we can kind of exchange ideas and learn from each other. So I would love to hear, you know, you are all welcome to unmute and chime in, or if you're shy, you can write it in the chat.
I do also see a recommendation for Harvest, which I have not used directly, but I have had clients use and have had good experience with.
Harvest, right. For time tracking.
Yeah.
I have a question for folks, actually. Does anyone use anything but Google Translate for translating foreign documents? So we've had like Swiss articles of incorporation or French financials, and Google Translate's the best we've gotten so far.
Yeah, I've never used anything besides that.
Or Dana, what did you say? I didn't hear that.
I said, I think they have people that do that. I think that might be the limitation of a translation program. So, I mean, in the past, I've actually had to, for claim documents, have them translated from Spanish into English, that sort of thing. And at least in the past, you could find linguistics people that specialize in it. But it's not as handy.
Yeah. Someone has to have questions out there. You brave enough to unmute?
How about onboarding new clients? We didn't talk too much about that.
Just thinking that, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of a good topic too, because, you know, in my field, it doesn't always make sense to have an appraisal. And so I try to do a lot of profiling, so to speak, on the phone, make sure that it is worthwhile to undertake the appraisal endeavor because it is costly and it's timely, and sort of try to decide what it is that they really need. So I spend a lot of time on the phone with them. I have an intake sheet that I put together that has all the questions that would be necessary for me to determine if it is worthwhile or not. And a lot of it has to do with value, is it justifiable or not? Do you guys have any particular onboarding practices that you want to share?
And yeah, Petra, if you want to jump in, because you've mentioned engagement letters several times. Is there sort of more around that?
Appraisal is an interesting field because, at least for me, like the sales cycle is pretty abbreviated, right? Like there's some industries, like I've gone through sales training that was done by folks who do like software sales training. And so they talk about this like 6-month lead time and all, number of meetings with folks. Usually how a project happens for me is I get an email referral or a phone call, and then they tell me a little bit about what they need. And then I ask to set up a quick phone call with them, which is like 15 to 30 minutes, just to make sure, Andrea, like you, I understand the reason they're asking for evaluation. And I spend a lot of time telling people they don't need evaluation or suggesting kind of lower cost alternatives to a formal appraisal and all of that, and making sure that I'm the right fit, right? And if not, referring them to somebody else. But after that short discussion, if I am the right fit, I usually send them a follow-up fee estimate. And then it's a go or no go situation, right? And from there, for me, it's the way that we start the onboarding process is an engagement letter. We're doing increasingly those through DocuSign now, which is so, convenient. And then a data request list. Right, so I put those two together and then we get going. And in terms of, one of the things we had talked about before the panel today was how do we get data from clients? So most of my clients still send me information through email, but our firm has its own kind of secure extranet site that we can set up and have people upload data to. Some of our clients send us data through Box or Dropbox. Our firm doesn't like using Dropbox, so we really discourage our clients from sending us data from a security standpoint. And even Box, we can't access directly. We'll have to have our IT group pull the documents down for us instead. So that's kind of how it works on our end.
Is there a reason that larger companies don't like Box or Dropbox? Is it just, are they not secure?
So I will say that my perspective is biased because my husband's in the software security space, but he believes Box is, and he used to work at Box, so he thinks Box is very secure and that companies like ours should not be worried about it because Box works for a lot of banks and things like that. Dropbox has a little bit more security concerns in the eyes of financial institutions, and our firm doesn't. We would, in the hierarchy, we prefer Box over Dropbox from a security standpoint, but I don't know all of the technicalities.
Okay.
Yeah, that's been my experience too, that we do in my office, we use Dropbox, but not, as I said, not the free version, the paid version, which I think is a little bit more supposed to be secure. But I have heard that Box is better and is considered more secure and is accepted by financial institutions.
We do have a question in the chat about questionnaire forms that people are using to obtain information from prospective clients in developing the engagement letters or estimating time. And thank you for the recommendation about something that is, apparently there's a class where you made one, which is great. And then I would toss out Google Forms as just a quick, easy way to create forms on the fly, but I don't know if anyone else has a more formal set of forms that they like to use.
I just have kind of an intake sheet, which has, a box basically for all the information that we need in order to onboard a client, meaning, what is the subject property, what is the intended use of the appraisal, what is the type of value we're going to use, what is the name of the estate or the client, what, all the where effective date, the location of the property, how much of the property, et cetera. So I have all that information on the intake sheet, and that's kind of our map of what we use as we go down the road of from start to finish on the appraisal. I know Kevin had his hand raised.
Just gonna say, yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of onboarding, everything's more expensive these days and we're all more busy. How have you raised fees, if at all? How have you approached that with recurring clients that are resistant to paying you more?
I'll jump in for myself. So because I have to enter time, in as part of my daily process, I have a billing rate. And that billing rate for me is specified by the firm, and it goes up a certain amount each year. That doesn't mean, though, because most of my engagements are fixed fee, I don't raise my rates every year, right? I kind of just make up for it every few years. I will say that the last year, going into 2022, our firm raised our rates more than inflationary. And so I've realized that that seems to be what's going on in the market. So this year I have raised fees, not ridiculously, right? I want to keep my clients, but I have raised kind of the starting price that I have for things. And it's actually, I have not gotten a lot of pushback, even from my existing clients. And I explain to them why, right? That we haven't raised rates in a couple of years, and that or that we realize the project is less efficient than we thought it was, initially. And so we've repriced it. Overall, I've actually had it well received.
I would agree. That was my experience too. I did increase my hourly rate this year, and there was no pushback at all. People were absolutely fine with it. I think, clients who are serious clients, I should say, don't have any pushback, but the ones who are just kind of fishing and, they'll ask me, do you do appraisals for free? I get a few of those every once in a while. And, that said, I do give a lot of information for free because I'm just a believer in education and have giving information to people who find the world of art very intimidating and, inherited things they don't know anything about. And if I can in any way help them get unstuck from where they are, I find that I've done my job, and that's paying it forward. At some point it comes back to me. So I don't mind doing that kind of stuff for people. Obviously, if it takes me, I don't allow it to take me a ton of time because I have to make a living, but I did not find people complaining at all about an increase in rates.
I had the same experience. I increased my rates this year and I've had no pushback.
I'll just throw in also probably so earlier on when my first few years as a partner, I discounted fees a little bit more often, right? Because I wanted to win something, or if I felt like, that it might be too much for the client. And maybe 5 years ago, when I started getting kind of busy enough, I stopped doing that. And my number of wins increased considerably, measurably, after I stopped discounting my rates. I don't know if it's just the confidence that was projected, right? Like, I believe in the value of my work, and if that's too much for you, that's okay. I can refer you to someone else who might be more affordable. And I started winning more engagements. So I think it's absolutely, we all have to stick firm to the value that we're providing and know our value, right?
I totally agree. I've had situations too where people have, if they've said, oh my gosh, that's a lot more than I expected. And I'll say, well, then you could go to X, Y, and Z and, they can help you. And I will tell you 9 out of 10 times they come back to me.
Well, we have 5 minutes left in this slot. And so I would love to give each of our panelists just a minute and a half to share anything you want to make sure the attendees take away from today. So we've talked about managing an appraisal practice from a bunch of different perspectives, both in terms of what you're appraising, the size of your businesses, the how you approach what you do. And so any key takeaways you would like to share? Petra, start with you.
putting me on the spot here. So I would say, because I do a lot of recruiting, and I do a lot of thinking about the time people in our team are spending on work versus are they burning out? Are we, is this practice continuing to be the way we all want it to be, which is kind of, a family, a lifestyle, but like we have lives outside of it and valuing all of that. Like, I think to the extent any of us can, right? I think that we need to be aware of our own mortality and like limits on our time and be really strict about what those limits are. And if we feel like we have more work than we can handle, that we need to invest in maybe hiring new people, or start saying no. It's right. Like the last 2 years, I have just gotten in this habit of every night I'm online, right? Like I have young kids and, so it's not like I'm working 16-hour days, but I'm just like every night I'm online, and I don't want to be that way. It's like, I've forgotten how to have an evening. And, my 2022 resolution is to stop that.
I love that. That's an
I will
excellent
I will
future story.
second that. My
I will
takeaway-
third that for sure. I think we're all on the same page with that.
And my takeaway from this, and this has been a great program, and Andrea, I do think you did a fantastic job putting this together. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
But-
This was, I have to say, thank you for your thank you, but it was purely selfish because I really needed all of you involved
Yeah.
and all of your guidance. So I appreciate the thank you, but really it was all for me.
Yeah, but the takeaway is to use whatever is available to, whether it's become more efficient, but the end game is to not just be devoted to your job as a profession, but to have a well-rounded life, which includes your work and your family and your social scene.
And your health.
And your health, yes.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
for sure. Well, what I really got out of this, which I think is incredibly important, is the degree to which we need to be specific in our goals and how we define that efficiency. I think it's so easy to throw out words without really thinking deeply about what we mean. So thank you, Belle, for reminding us of that. And I also liked what you said about making an investment in our employees, thinking of it as you're training them and everything that you're doing that might seem like it's extra work and that you don't have time for it. If you change your mindset and think of it as an investment in the future, you might be more willing, excuse me, goodness. You might be more willing to take that time because you see the benefit long-term. And also looking at where do we have control to make change? Those are like the 3 gems that I got out of it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been fabulous.
Thank you, everyone, all the participants for joining us, and my fellow panelists and Belle. And I just wanted to remind you all that we have next week another webinar on Japanese prints. So please do look out for that. It went out in our newsletter, but if you need any information, do send us an email and I'm happy to send it along. It's going to be on valuing Japanese prints with Catherine Martin from the Scholten Gallery in New York. Should be fun. Hope to see you there. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.